Well, topping the news this hour, it's one of the most highly anticipated book releases in the U.S. A first-hand account of the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound with a detailed explanation of the events leading up to those tense moments. The book, named No Easy Day, the first-hand account of the mission that killed Osama bin Laden, was published today by Penguin Books and is already a bestseller on Amazon. It was co-authored by two men, the well-known journalist Kevin Maurer and a former Navy SEAL who used the pseudonym Mark Owen. Turns out the former SEAL is 36-year-old Matt Bissonnette from Wrangell, Alaska. For many Americans, this book is exactly what they wanted, an inside look of what really happened at the Abbottabad compound. 60 Minutes was the first station to interview Matt Bissonnette. Here's part of that interview.
One of the things that I liked after the fact was I remember Admiral Mullen coming by and talking to each one of us, and then Admiral Olson as well. And I thought that was cool. They walked by, shook each of our hands, and said, "Hey, are you guys ready? Can you guys pull this off?" And I'm pretty sure to a man we all said yes, absolutely.
How long was it before you got the call to go?
We had a week off in Virginia Beach, and when I say off, it wasn't completely, but we had a week off at home. Conducted one more rehearsal day of training on the life-size mock-up, and then we got the word that we were going.
Now, many are questioning the motives of the book, and the Pentagon is eager to get its hands on the book, as well as the man who wrote it. Bissonnette did not have the book vetted by the Pentagon before publishing it, and he had to sign 2 non-disclosure forms while serving the SEALs. So, is he a hero or a traitor, and what could possibly come out of prosecuting him? Colonel Morris Davis is a retired Air Force attorney and the professor at Howard University School of Law. Colonel Davis, thank you so much for joining me. So first of all, let's talk about these non-disclosure forms. How binding are they, especially when you're out of the military?
Well, they're very clear. I signed similar agreements when I was in the military, and I'm sure like Mr. Bissonnette, when I left as well, you signed saying that you would not disclose classified information, and it explains there are penalties for doing so. So it's fairly explicit what you're getting into.
And talk about the process of vetting books. I understand that they actually have to look through everything because it's a matter of national security if these books have classified information. But do they ever vet things that are maybe not necessarily national secrets, just things that maybe make the military look bad?
Well, there's a good example. Tony Schaefer, who was a former Army officer, wrote a book that the Pentagon made it a bestseller overnight because they went out and bought up every edition of the first run. The book was later vetted, re-released, and the New York Times actually did a side-by-side. And you can see the significant editing of minute details that obviously didn't put anyone at risk. But oftentimes the vetting process is used to remove embarrassing information. Not anything that really hurts national security, but there are things that we've done that we're not particularly proud of, and if we can, we like to try to keep those quiet.
And we actually have Tony Schaefer on the program quite frequently. He's kind of showed us and talked about his book in some detail. So let's talk about this book in particular. They didn't have it vetted. They had it vetted through what they say is their legal analysts. But why is that not enough?
Well, it specifically says, I'm assuming the agreements that Mr. Bissonnette signed were very similar to the ones I signed. And it explicitly states that anything related to your activities while you're read into these secret programs that you'll submit in advance. And I've done it myself. I wrote an article that I submitted to the CIA for their review, waited a few days and got it back and didn't have any problem. Mr. Bissonnette and his folks chose not to do that. Nothing in the agreement says you can substitute who you think is an adequate proxy to review the work. So I think he clearly understood that what he was doing was wrong. The Department of Defense General Counsel, Jay Johnson, sent a letter last week to Mr. Bissonnette and to Penguin Books explaining that it appeared he was in violation of the agreement, and nonetheless they elected to move forward.
And they say that there's nothing classified in these books. They say that there's no problem with them. I mean, the co-author signed on, and he's written 4 books in the past, 4 very well-known books. He's known as a well-known journalist. So if there's nothing classified, why not submit it to the Pentagon?
Well, it's hard to imagine discussing anything related to the raid that resulted in Osama bin Laden's death, other than I was there, it happened, that wouldn't be classified. I think there's an abuse of the classification system, and a lot of things that shouldn't be classified are. but it's hard to imagine, at least from my experience and my involvement with detainees at Guantanamo, the level of information that's classified. It's hard to imagine that Mr. Bissonnette, other than acknowledging he was there that day, would be about the extent of what you could say without getting into classified. Now, I haven't read the book, but it's just hard to imagine it being more than a page long without getting into some classified information. And apparently the Pentagon, George Little, the Pentagon spokesman this afternoon, said that it was highly irresponsible that they've reviewed the book now and that it does contain information that they consider to be classified. So we'll see what the next steps are.
Right. And just taking a bigger look back at these non-disclosure forms, when you sign away basically your freedom of speech with these non-disclosure forms, how far do they go? How long into the future is it that before you can speak of what you did and take credit for what you did in the military?
Well, there is no time limit. If you're talking about what you did while you were involved in classified programs without advanced authorization, you're not permitted to talk about it. Now, interestingly, the Obama administration has been pretty free in talking about drone strikes and the death of bin Laden, the computer attacks that shut down or at least hampered the Iranian nuclear program. So they've been kind of fast and loose in letting information out. Embarrassing information, on the other hand, has been a little slow to get out. So how that process would have gone had Mr. Bissonnette asked for permission remains to be seen, and I guess we won't know.
Now, Mr. Bissonnette's book comes at a quite interesting time in politics right now. He, of course, says that his book is not political, but it's September. Elections are in November, so not that far away. So let's I want to play you a quick soundbite from the 60 Minutes interview that he did, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
This book is not political whatsoever. It doesn't badmouth either party. And we specifically chose September 11th to keep it out of the politics. If these crazies on either side of the aisle want to make it political, shame on them. This is a book about September 11th, and it needs to rest on September 11th, not be brought into the political arena, because this has nothing to do with politics.
So you heard him there say it has nothing to do with politics. He actually went on in that 60 Minutes interview to explain that not only were a lot of the SEALs that he worked with opposed to President Obama, but one of them actually made a comment when they got back from the raid saying, we basically got him reelected. So there's no way around it. It's political, right? Yeah,
you're right. There's no way to avoid it. In fact, if you've noticed in the last 24 hours, Vice President Biden out on the campaign trail, their slogan, he said they ought to put on bumper stickers now is thanks to Barack Obama, Osama bin Laden's dead and General Motors is alive.
Saw those.
So this is clearly at the heart of the election. One of the consistent critiques of Democrats is they're a bunch of wimps. They're weak on national security. So for the president, it's kind of a conundrum here. On the one hand, it's good to have the public reminded that he was responsible for the death of Osama bin Laden. On the other hand, President Obama, there have been 6 people indicted under the Espionage Act. John Kiriakou, who also wrote a book, from the CIA, Tom Drake from NSA. There have been twice as many people indicted by the Obama administration for leaking information or allegedly leaking information than in every other administration combined. So to not do anything, people are going to say that that's to help his reelection effort, and if he does something, they're going to say it's to try to quiet somebody who's telling the truth. So it's kind of a no-win situation for the Obama administration.
Well, and it's an interesting disparity seeing, that they are going after these whistleblowers. We've actually reported on Kiriakou as well quite a bit. So let's talk about what could possibly come out of this. I mean, right now what we're hearing is that all the profits for the book are going to go to fallen warriors' families here in the U.S. And I know that the Justice Department is pursuing possibly a civilian case that would leak into the profits. What good can come out of prosecuting him, especially in a civilian court?
Well, I think like many of these cases where there have been charges brought, even if they've been dropped, is that chilling effect. Not so much the effect on Mr. Bissonnette, but on the next Mark Bissonnette to come along. Does he talk or not talk, and will this keep people quiet and keep information out of the public domain? And
at the same time, I mean, like you said earlier, Democrats are afraid of being touted as not handsy enough when it comes to national security. So if they don't do something, will it hurt them?
Well, I think it will. As again, there is no graceful way out of this for the Democrats or for the Obama administration. If they do nothing, then the critics are going to say, well, you want this information out there to remind the public as they go to the polls that you authorized the death of Osama bin Laden. If they try to prosecute, then it's going to be you're trying to shut down another whistleblower who's trying to tell the truth. And I just don't see a real graceful way to dance around this issue.
And I mean, let's talk about, we kind of touched on it earlier, but let's talk about the fact that, you know, they say that there is some classified information, but do you think at this point they're looking for classified information, anything to punish somebody who they didn't want to speak out?
I think they are. I mean, there's still information classified at Guantanamo from people that have been in our custody for 11 years. As you mentioned, the Osama bin Laden raid was just a little over a year ago, so the information is much more fresh than the information that some of the detainees at Guantanamo have, which they're still safeguarding and protecting. So as I said before, I think it's hard to really imagine discussing the events that took place that night without talking about tactics and techniques and information that could potentially be useful to an adversary. So I think they are probably coming through the book again right now, looking to see what they can do with that information.
What, if anything, right?
Right.
So just talking about Guantanamo Bay for a minute, let's take a look at the DNC platforms from 2008 until today. So back in 2008, they wanted to, I mean, President Obama touted it. He was going to close Guantanamo Bay no matter what it took. He signed an executive order. Guantanamo Bay is still open. You are an expert on Guantanamo Bay. So let's look at the Guantanamo Bay 2012 DNC platform. It says, that is why we are reforming military commissions to bring them in line with the rule of law. That is why we are substantially reducing the population on Guantanamo Bay without adding to it. And we remain committed to working at the branches, all branches of the government, to close the prison altogether because it is inconsistent with national security interests and our values. A little bit different of a narrative from 2012, from 2008. They were saying they were going to close it, and now they're kind of saying, we might not put as many prisoners in it. Eventually, we'll close it.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those, if you recall, the George Bush the elder had his read my lips moment, where he said, read my lips, no new taxes. Well, I remember President Obama's lips moving, saying, I'm closing Guantanamo, which was in 2008, and we're sitting here in 2012. So he didn't keep his promise. I mean, this is one where there's no quibbling about did he say it or did he not. He said he was going to close Guantanamo. He acknowledged it's a blight on our national reputation, and he caved into the fearmongers on the other side and didn't want to look like a wimp. And so he's kept it open, and it remains a blight today. In fact, Attorney General Eric Holder, a week or two ago in an interview with Bloomberg, said that he regrets abandoning the decision back in '09 when the pressure mounted, that we could have had these trials in federal court. They would have been over by now. They would have been safe and secure, and it would have been a credit to our reputation rather than the continuing blight that we've got now.
A lot for the DNC to talk about this week with, you know, everything from President Obama's re-election campaign to maybe closing Guantanamo Bay and this book. So thank you so much for joining the program. Colonel Morris Davis, retired Air Force attorney and professor at Howard University School of Law.
My pleasure.